You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's Thursday, March 3rd. I'm Emily Schutz.
And I'm David Marquez. On today's show, the threat of war on Ukrainian art and the struggle to protect culture in the face of invasion.
That all of the museums are trying to somehow safeguard their collections by hiding them and putting them into safe places.
Closer to home, Black physicians are underrepresented. That's why some Black New Yorkers say it's hard to find the right doctor for them.
It's very, very important to me to have a doctor who looks like me, who understands my concerns, who I feel will listen to me.
And a program that helps low-income students access private coaching so they can nail their auditions for New York City's performing arts high schools.
Students would say to me, I'm going to audition for LaGuardia High School. And I'd say, okay, sing for me. And I was like, oh my goodness, no, you're not ready.
All this and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Russia and Ukraine say they've agreed on the need to set up humanitarian corridors, possibly a temporary ceasefire as well, to allow for emergency supplies and civilian evacuations. However, there's little sign of an end to the now 8-day-old war between them. Both delegations say they'll keep talking. The president of France, meanwhile, says he talked to Russian President Vladimir Putin today for an hour and a half. Emmanuel Macron says he came away believing that the worst is yet to come in Ukraine. We have this from NPR's Eleanor Beardsley.
Though Putin requested the call, he made no concessions. According to a French readout, Putin denied there were any civilian victims in Ukraine and stressed the necessity of his actions to denazify and neutralize the country. Macron told Putin his lies are unacceptable. Putin criticized a recent speech in which Macron said Putin was solely and entirely responsible for the war. Following his call with Putin, Macron spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who remains in Kyiv as Russian forces advance on the capital. Zelensky underlined his desire and will to continue the fight. Eleanor Beardsley, NPR News, Paris.
A Kentucky jury has acquitted a former detective of wanton endangerment charges linked to the raid that killed Breonna Taylor 2 years ago in her home. Stray bullets from Brett Hankison's firearm struck a neighboring apartment. Hankison said he fired his weapon to protect fellow officers who were fired on by Taylor's boyfriend when they entered the African-American woman's apartment in the middle of the night on a search warrant. During closing arguments, defense attorney Stu Matthews said Hankison and the officers had little time to react in self-defense.
This entire shooting part of this, from the breach of the door to the end of the shooting, has been described as anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds, I believe. That is fast.
No one has been charged directly with Taylor's fatal shooting in 2020. President Biden is asking Congress for tens of billions of dollars to fight the coronavirus pandemic and to help Ukraine. NPR's Asma Khalid reports lawmakers are debating a plan to continue funding the government.
The president is asking Congress for $22.5 billion for his COVID-19 response efforts. The Office of Management and Budget says that'll help cover tests, treatments, vaccines, and research. In a letter to the Speaker of the House, the acting OMB director says this money is needed immediately to, quote, avoid disruption to ongoing COVID response efforts over the next few months. This COVID money is lumped in with a request for $10 billion to assist Ukraine. That money would go toward defense equipment, humanitarian aid, and sanctions enforcement, among other things. The White House anticipates even more money may be needed in the future, given the rapidly changing situation in Ukraine. Asma Khalid, NPR News.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average closes down nearly 100 points. You're listening to NPR News.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm David Newtown. At a Brooklyn press conference today, Mayor Adams announced a new development he says will make New York City a major hub in the offshore wind industry.
The South Brooklyn Marine Terminal is soon to be transformed into one of the largest offshore wind port facilities in the nation.
The city will partner with Equinor, a wind development company, to retrofit the terminal to construct turbine parts needed for offshore wind farms. The development is part of a 15-year plan the city announced last fall. The city says the plan will cost up to $200 million. New York State and New York City have pledged to get 70% of their electricity from renewable sources by 2030. According to a judge's decision today, New York can hold elections this year using Democrat-drawn maps, even if those maps are deemed unconstitutional. The reason County Court Judge Patrick McAllister gave for his decision is that there isn't enough time to redraw the districts before the June primary. Republicans had argued in a lawsuit that the districts were gerrymandered to benefit Democrats and harm GOP voters. Judge McAllister says the lawsuit may continue, though, and he could call for new elections next year if he determines the maps were improperly drawn. Today, the city announced it's extending the masking requirement for children under the age of 5 at New York City public schools. A decision hasn't yet been made on whether the city will lift its mask mandate for students 6 years and older, as well as staff and teachers. According to Amaris Cockfield, a spokesperson for the mayor, the Department of Education will continue to offer masks for students, teachers, and staff. As of yesterday, the state no longer requires masking in schools. The Brooklyn Nets face the Miami Heat tonight at 7:30 p.m. in a home game. The Nets, 8th in the Eastern Conference, have lost their last 3 home games and are hoping to pick up a win against the Heat, currently 1st in the Eastern Conference. It's 40 degrees and sunny in Manhattan. Expect clear skies tomorrow, with rain coming over in the weekend. This is David Newtown, Columbia Radio News.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Emily Schetz.
And I'm David Marquez.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine has taken a horrifying human toll. The United Nations report at least 700 civilian deaths and over 1 million displaced to neighboring countries. But there's another potential casualty: Ukraine's cultural heritage. 2 days ago, the Ivankov Museum near Kyiv was destroyed in an air raid. It housed works by renowned Ukrainian folk artist Maria Primachenko. According to the country's foreign ministry, 25 of her works were lost. Maria Shust has directed the Ukrainian Museum in the East Village for 45 years. My co-host, David Marquez, asked her how Ukrainians are working to save their cultural treasures.
I've been in touch with one of our curators. We've done a number of exhibits with him from Ukraine. I understand that all of the museums are trying to somehow safeguard their collections by hiding them and putting them into safe places. And hopefully they will survive. I'm not sure, looking at everything that's going on and all the bombing that's taking place now in Ukraine, whether they can survive this onslaught.
At your museum in New York, do you have any current exhibits about invasion going on, or do you have any plan for the future?
We're planning to we're working on an exhibit that we wanted to kind of call attention to what's going on here. But we've been so inundated now with people wanting to come and talk, and it's hard to get the work done. But we are working on an exhibit right now.
Mm-hmm. And do you know what other museums or cultural institutions are doing, if they're doing anything similar?
Many institutions are now really very much involved with what's going on in Ukraine, with organizing rallies and make lists of how people can help, how they can donate. So people are trying to kind of scramble and try to do what everybody can. Yeah.
And so what should other countries be doing to help Ukrainians in Ukraine prevent the loss of artwork and cultural heritage?
At this point, I think it's the best that they can do is to try to somehow stop this onslaught. We appreciate everything that's being done throughout the world. People are calling attention, holding rallies, all these other efforts that are being done. But Ukraine needs help, military help, with weapons that would prevent the bombing as much as people can, to influence the government and to put the pressure on Russia as much as possible. As I said, we really appreciate all the help that Ukraine has been getting, but they need this to continue with this assistance.
listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Emily Schutz.
And I'm David Marquez.
Starting on Monday, New Yorkers will no longer be required to show proof of vaccination at restaurants and other entertainment venues.
Uptown Radio's Sarah Jokubaitis found that some New Yorkers are wary about the coming changes.
Wu & Nussbaum is a quintessential New York restaurant in Morningside Heights that sells bagels alongside noodles and dumplings. Mione Moore is getting coffee here and says that she and her family do not plan to change their COVID habits yet.
It's not going to change my behavior. I am fully vaccinated and boosted. It does make me uncomfortable because I have less certainty about whether the people that will be dining next to me are vaccinated, and so that is a concern.
The manager here agrees. Nancy Aritzia says that people like her who work in restaurants and kitchens are worried about their safety. According to research by the University of California, San Francisco, they face the greatest COVID-19 risk in the workplace after healthcare workers.
For our safety, we still are using them, and we are still checking for, even though a lot of people tell us that it's not mandated anymore, but since this is a private establishment, we are still requiring it.
A few blocks away, Kalman Lobel is enjoying his coffee with friends outside the Hungarian pastry shop, where the group has met for over 20 years. He says that leaders need to be more clear when it comes to public health policy.
I don't really know. I think that it would be, I wish that there were a more consistent policy, but I realize it's difficult to make consistent policy in a situation that's very dynamic. So those are my thoughts on it.
A lot of people I talked to were worried about what is going to happen in 2 or 3 weeks after the restrictions are lifted. Howard Holstein is visiting from Chicago, and he says, just you wait.
I liken it to, it's pouring out, you have an umbrella, and it stopped raining, and you're dry, so you can stop using the umbrella. You're going to start getting wet again, so same thing.
Of course, private companies can still require patrons to mask up or show their vaccine cards, so don't delete the Excelsior Pass or NYC COVID Safe apps from your phone just yet. Sarah Jokubaitis, Uptown Radio News.
Some New York City subway stations are going to look very different in coming years. Last week, the MTA announced a pilot project to build protective doors that would block the open tracks from the platform.
The MTA says the doors will put a stop to the growing number of incidents where riders were pushed onto the tracks. But as Julian Abraham reports, the doors may also prevent another far more common cause of death in the stations. And you should be advised this story will discuss suicide in some depth.
In the past 3 months, 3 subway riders were intentionally pushed onto the tracks where they died. These were random attacks. The perpetrators did not know the victims, and that's left subway riders rattled.
I learned how to stay away from the yellow line.
No, I stay away, man. That's, you stay back, trains coming, you don't know everybody. So you stay back,
I get nervous, I don't want to see that. I don't want anybody fall on the tracks. It's scary.
The MTA says the new platform doors should prevent these kinds of attacks. They'll be installed at 3 platforms to start, in Times Square, the JFK Airport station in Queens, and on 3rd Avenue. And the doors should also prevent another cause of death at the stations, suicide, which is actually far more common in the subway system than homicides. The MTA stopped releasing information on the numbers of suicides after 2003, but in that year, 70 people died of suicide on subway tracks. And they will say that over the past 2 years, that number has increased by 50%. The MTA did not reply to our request for comment for this story. Dr. Richard Friedman is a clinical psychologist and professor at Weill Cornell Medical Center. He says there may be good reasons why the MTA does not report the numbers of suicide deaths without context.
Well, it's not surprising in a way that they would not have discussed suicide as the reason for the doors, for the simple reason that they would not want to, they wouldn't want to increase contagion.
Dr. Friedman also says it's important for the media to report suicide as a result of serious mental illness that is in fact treatable. He also says physical barriers like platform doors have proven to be effective in other cities.
For example, when people jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge to commit suicide and they put up safety nets, it stopped people from suiciding, and the suicide rates dropped overall, not just jumping.
The MTA says the platform doors will be installed on 3 subway stations by 2024. Julian Abraham, Columbia Radio News.
To find the best medical care, patients often seek out highly recommended specialists in hospitals.
For Black Americans, having an African American doctor can mean there are aspects of their care that they know will be fully considered. But, as David Newtown reports, finding a Black doctor can be difficult.
Dara Thurmond is 36. She works in Manhattan as a registered nurse. She's planning on having a second kid, but she says because she's Black, she wants to find an OBGYN who is also Black. She's succeeded before, but her old doctors are no longer covered by her insurance.
I went to the provider list through my health insurance online and have been scrolling and looking at the names of the doctors, trying to see which name looks like it's ethnic, which is kind of weird to say, then Googling the doctor's name.
Thurmond says she does all this to make sure she finds a doctor who is aware of all of the health issues she could face as a Black woman, especially a pregnant one. For example, Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related issues than white women.
It's very, very important to me to have a doctor who looks like me, who understands my concerns, who I feel will listen to me.
Though 15% of New York's population identifies as Black or African American, according to the American Association of Medical Colleges, only 5% of practicing physicians in the state do the same. In Georgia and Maryland, states with high percentages of Black residents, it can be easier to find a Black physician. But in Wyoming, Utah, and Idaho, where the Black population is low, there are fewer than 50 Black or African American doctors in each state. Either way, the odds can be stacked against Black patients. Dr. Deirdre Foreman teaches Africana Studies at Ramapo College of New Jersey.
Historically, poor health and wellness have been prevalent in the African American community. The root is health disparities.
Disparities derive from many sources: discrimination, social inequalities, even poor self-care in regards to mental health. These issues can all make accessing proper health care difficult for Black people. Foreman says it's important for doctors and patients to have shared lived experiences.
For example, racism causes stress. So if you are being treated by an African American physician and you are African American yourself, perhaps that physician can understand and better relate to the fact that, yes, that is a valid, cause of stress. I perhaps have experienced that racism myself, so I can identify with what it is that you're saying.
The importance of shared identity is echoed by Black doctors themselves. Dr. Tracy K. Paul is a cardiologist at Weill Cornell Medicine on the East Side. As a Black doctor, she says that's why she chose her specialty.
Black patients in particular carry a huge heart disease burden, and so I felt, with this specialty, I was able to explore more, my interest in health equity and just my interest of being of service to my community.
That shared sense of identity is what Thurmond says she wants in a Black doctor. Luckily for her, she didn't end up searching long.
I actually kind of lucked out with my search, where it only took me one day to find what I was looking for. Okay, this looks like Black name for a doctor. Let me search to see if I can find a picture. Found a picture, and then was able to schedule an appointment with her.
Thurmond still has one more step before she's done. She needs to see if she likes the doctor she found. David Newtown, Columbia Radio News.
That's it for the first half of our show. Thanks for tuning in.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm David Marquez.
And I'm Emily Schutz.
Activists are protesting against big buildings which they say are polluting the city.
And an early childhood education expert has thoughts on the ending of the mask mandate.
These stories and more coming up. But first, these headlines.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Kelly Canaday.
There was talk today of a ceasefire in Ukraine, but Russian President Vladimir Putin has signaled that he's going to continue with the war. The two sides have agreed to create some routes for escape from major cities and to have some food and medicine delivered. More than 1 million people have fled from Ukraine. In other Ukraine news, Western governments are coming for Russian yachts and private jets. France today seized a yacht as a part of their new sanctions. President Joe Biden has ordered the Department of Justice to, quote, find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, and their private jets. The hunt for assets is getting help from an unlikely source. Jack Sweeney is the teenager from Florida who started a Twitter account tracking Elon Musk's private jet. He has now created similar accounts tracking Vladimir Putin's jet and the planes belonging to other billionaires in Russia. International observers are questioning the election of Libya's new prime minister. The UN says that the recent vote fell short of expected standards. There were reported instances of intimidation and not enough transparency. 2 people now claim to be the rightful prime minister of Libya, and both sides have military support in the capital. The Congressional Committee investigating former President Donald Trump is planning an April hearing to show how Trump broke the law. Yesterday, the panel said in a court filing that Trump obstructed Congress and conspired to defraud the United States. The chair of Congressional Committee says that the April hearing will reveal evidence and bring witnesses forward to paint a picture of what happened during the riot on January 6th. New York City's schools chancellor David Banks plans to bring change to the Department of Education. Concerned about the stats that 65% of minority students graduate without being able to read, Banks wants to ensure that students will learn phonics by grade 3. This is Kelly Canaday, Columbia Radio News.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm David Marquez.
And I'm Emily Schutz.
Buildings are among the largest emitters of greenhouse gases in New York. So in 2019, the city passed Local Law 97. The law requires all but the smallest buildings to reduce their emissions and become more energy efficient.
But activists say some building owners have been pushing back on the law. Today, in a protest in Times Square, protesters targeted one building that they say is an example of the city's lax enforcement of Local Law 97. Chantel Destra reports. When it comes to encouraging people to drive electric vehicles, or EVs as they're known, New York City's got a problem. The New York Department of Transportation says the city needs a lot more chargers, easily accessible in public places.
One New York City startup thinks it has a solution to make charging easy and available almost anywhere in the city. Mark Gilchrist met the founders and brought back this report.
The company is called VoltPost. It just got $1.3 million in investment. On a recent rainy afternoon, I got together with several of its founders next to a lamppost on Broadway. CEO Jeffrey Prosserman bangs on the metal of the street lamppost because this is his big idea.
We're looking to retrofit lampposts across the country into EV chargers in order to democratize access across all communities.
In his vision, a lot of the street lamps in New York City could be retrofitted to become charging stations for cars. Once we got out of the rain, Jeffrey's partner, Luke Myro, explained why VoltPost's approach could be a winner for the city.
We think that this is an ideal solution to get federal money and actually work with municipalities and different public sector participants to be able to pay for some of the hardware to make this as cheap as possible for the municipalities that we deploy in.
New York City's Department of Transportation owns 250,000 light posts that could be turned into chargers. That's a lot. One downside, though, is the 4 to 8 hours each lamppost would need to fully charge a car. Luke says that he expects that sometimes people would want fast chargers and go to a central location like a gas station, but sometimes they wouldn't want to go to the bother and just want a little juice.
Our proposal is much more for the urban environment where curbside charging makes much more sense in our opinion.
It might make sense, but can it ever really happen in New York City?
None of this stuff is impossible, but it'll be complicated.
Professor Nilda Mesa teaches at Columbia and was recently the director of the New York City Mayor's Office for Sustainability. She says the proposal may work technically, But politically, it might be seen as taking away parking spots.
Parking is like the third rail for a lot of governments because there's such a lack of free parking on streets. And it also becomes very controversial, particularly in residential neighborhoods, if they think that people are going to be coming in from outside.
And then there's also the issue of whether New York's electricity grid can handle the huge increase in electricity demand expected from a steep rise in EVs on its roads. And if you think parking is controversial in the city, try building new power plants. Mark Gilchrist, Columbia Radio News.
My God, the best sessions always start after midnight. So sometimes you're going till the sun comes up.
Matt Batone, music engineer, Penthouse Recording Studios, New York City.
Penthouse is notable because we recorded a lot of clients, particularly rap clients, but we've had people like Justin Bieber, DJ Khaled, Drake. People generally aren't going to know that it's kind of like a party environment. Sometimes it's very high pressure because you feel like you're the only person working and there's a bunch of people just going crazy in the background. You have to have good intuition for music. You have to generally understand what people are trying to do and know how to get there. I always loved making music. I started because I made my own music and it didn't sound good. Went into a studio near me and it sounded even worse than what I was doing. So I was like, well, I can't go wrong. I guess I'll figure this out myself. And then just spend years working on that. And then eventually it was like, wait, I can make money doing this.
You're listening to Uptown Radio from Columbia Radio News, Thursdays at 4 p.m.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm David Marquez.
And I'm Emily Schetz.
We apologize for technical difficulties, and we will now return to Chantel Destra's story. Buildings are among the largest emitters of greenhouse gases in New York, so in 2019, the city passed Local Law 97. The law requires all but the smallest buildings to reduce their emissions and become more energy efficient.
But activists say some building owners have been pushing back on the law. Today, in a protest in Times Square, protesters targeted one building that they say is an example of the city's lax enforcement of Local Law 97. Chantel Destra reports.
What do we want? Where do we want it? Now!
The organizers of the protest describe One Bryant Park as a super polluter, exactly the kind of building that should be modified to meet the emission and efficacy standards of Local Law 97. Experts say large buildings like this are the source of nearly half of New York City's greenhouse gas emissions. Councilman and co-chair of the Progressive Caucus Fighting for Climate Justice, Lincoln Ressler.
Local Law 97 is the most important piece of legislation that we have passed in New York City in decades. Yes. The climate crisis is the existential challenge of our time.
Local Law 97 says that buildings decarbonize their electricity systems and switch to cleaner fuels. Activists say that many buildings, including One Bryant Park, are simply refusing to implement the law. And the owners of the building don't disagree. In an email, Jordan Borowitz, the director of external affairs of One Bryant Park, said the building may well be subject to fines under the law, but he adds the law sets unrealistic standards for larger buildings. He says One Bryant Park is already implementing many environmental and sustainability features. John Pope of environmental group Food and Water Watch says complying with the law will be costly, but to not comply will cost the city far more.
It's like, what was the cost of Hurricane Ida? What was the cost of Hurricane Sandy? You know, these are major costs that we're absorbing as a society, and we need to kind of all step up, stop screwing around, and it's time to get to work.
Enforcing the law takes resources, funding missing from Mayor Adams' budget for next year. We reached out to the Mayor's Office of Climate and Sustainability for comment, but they did not reply. Public advocate Jumani Williams said at the rally that it's time for the city to back the law as passed.
We need to hear from the mayor that we're going to fully implement this, we're going to fully enforce it, we're going to fully fund it. There's no excuse. It's been well thought out. Any excuse continues to harm our planet. New York needs to lead, not follow.
The groups at today's protest say they will continue to pressure the mayor to enforce Local Law 97. Chantel Destra, Columbia Radio News.
Mask mandates have been lifted for most New York State school districts, and Mayor Eric Adams will likely make the decision to lift mandates in New York City schools in the coming days.
Maria Mavrides is a professor in the Early Childhood Education program at Hunter College. She says lifting the mandates could raise complicated issues for parents, teachers, and schools, although for many young students, masks are just a part of their daily routine.
Children that are 3 years old right now, they have basically not known a world without masks. A lot of the children have totally adapted to the concepts of wearing masks, and also they have adapted to receive and understand language with the masks on.
Good to know. So what is this transition going to look like?
Parents always will have the option to bring children to school with masks, and teachers should have that option as well. Now, the flip side of that is that there may be some social stigma, from wearing the mask now in the classroom. So as teachers, we have to be very mindful of that and making sure that everyone is accepted despite the choices they make. So children that decide to wear the mask are not in any way different than those that just come to school without a mask.
Could you talk a little bit about teachers? What will this transition look like for them?
There are some of them that are relief that they will be able to teach without a mask. A lot of them have been exposed to the virus already in the latest Omicron wave, so they feel like the worst it's behind them. However, there is a portion of teachers that feel that this is premature, particularly in the early childhood age group. Because as you know, children below 5 years old, they haven't had the vaccine yet. And studies show that masking for children between 2 and 5 years old was linked to a 13% reduction in childcare closures due to COVID outbreaks. So many teachers and directors feel like without the vaccine for the younger kids, this mask removal is a little premature.
What can we expect as far as the divide among those who are still pro-mask and those who are not in schools?
Directors, principals, and teachers and families need to be included in the conversations for their own centers. What works for them? What does it mean when a friend doesn't wear a mask or wears a mask? And why everyone should be welcome in the classroom? I think that the leadership, how the leadership reacts to it, and how the leadership brings about the different members of the community, the teachers and the parents, to discuss our different opinions about what is happening, I think it's crucial.
Mm-hmm. How can parents explain this to their kids?
One of the things that I think will be a mistake is to say it's over. Yes, finally we got rid of the masks, because that may not be true. Right now, I think the messaging should be there is a choice that we can make, and we can talk as a family of why that choice works for our family, taking into account why that choice may be made with others in mind. For example, if you're having a teacher that may be high risk, you may want to have the conversation with your child of why you're going to send that child mask to protect the teacher.
That was Maria Mavrides, a professor in the Early Childhood Education program at Hunter College.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm David Marquez.
And I'm Emily Schutz. Next Friday is the deadline for New York City public high school applications. Students who want to go to a performing arts high school have to audition.
Some kids get private coaching to help them sing on key. Others can't afford it. Lucy Grindon reports on a program that helps low-income students ace their auditions.
The program is called Reaching for the Arts. It was started by Sharon Daly Johnson, the performing arts teacher at PS 191 in Midtown.
Students would say to me, I'm going to audition for LaGuardia High School. And I'd say, okay, sing for me. And I was like, oh my goodness, no, you're not ready. It just killed me.
So in 2015, she and a colleague created a program that brings in talented actors and musicians to coach students for their high school auditions. One 7th grader, Jeremiah Brock Gamboa, wants to audition for acting and singing next year.
And I feel it after midnight, feeling that you can't fight my one.
Jeremiah is determined to get in. The program paired him up with a musical theater major from the Professional Performing Arts High School who's been mentoring him.
Emily is very helpful. I feel like she's an amazing actress, and if she ever makes it big, I would love to work with her one day.
Daley Johnson finds coaches at the Manhattan School of Music and also draws from the pool of students who have gone through the program in the past. Jeremiah's mentor, Emily Miranda, is one of them. When she was in the 8th grade, Reaching for the Arts helped her prep for her auditions.
Reaching for the Arts, completely changed my life. They gave me the opportunity to have these certain vocal lessons and acting classes for free. A lot of these classes cost thousands and thousands of dollars, but for kids like me who are middle class, there's a lot of kids who are struggling and have those same dreams.
She tries to help the kids she mentors get in touch with their emotions.
I try to just teach them not only about hey, look at this material, but also, are you digesting the material? How does that make you feel? How can you use your, human past experiences into your work?
Reaching for the Arts has helped 66 kids get into arts high schools over the years. The organization gets funding from city grants, but those grants can only be used to pay for group programming, like choir. If families can afford it, they pay $30 an hour for individual lessons. For those who can't afford it, the individual lessons are funded by private donations and fundraisers. Daley Johnson says the organization decides how much to charge each family on a case-by-case basis.
I know that mom's a single mom, so I'm not going to say to her, we charge $30, can you pay half?
Having coaching can make a real difference. John Hamilton is on LaGuardia High School's music faculty. He reviews vocal music auditions. He says you can tell who's had training and who hasn't.
On more than one occasion, we've had kids come in to audition and they finish their song and you think, wow, that was just amazing. Okay, let me hear you sing these, da, 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 and they go, la, 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 la. It has to do with having a trainer who can spend enough time with you teaching you, here's your starting note, now you have to go to this place.
Though the auditions are always competitive, Daley Johnson estimates that Reaching for the Arts has more than a 90% success rate.
They might not have gotten to their first choice, they've gotten into a performing arts high school.
And that may be the first step on the long, difficult road to stardom. Lucy Grindon, Columbia Radio News.
Next up, we have another story about competition and representation. But this time, it's about body representation, or the lack thereof. Last week was the annual Bodycon. The virtual convention focuses on representation for diverse bodies in industries like modeling and entertainment. Many plus-size actors say their opportunities in theater are limited, that they aren't typically considered for the same roles as a thin person. Emily Schutz spoke with actors about their experiences in the industry and the changes they'd like to see.
Actress Nikki Garza was a panelist at Bodycon and is a guest actor on the hit CW show Dynasty, where she plays office worker Lucia Suarez.
Yes. Do you speak Spanish?
I do. ¿Qué le pasa, señor?
Está en coma.
Garza has found success on television, but her initial acting dream was to appear on Broadway. She says when she auditioned for theater, she'd fall into one of two categories.
It was never the lead. I couldn't be the ingenue. It was always oh, you could be this old woman, or you could be the sex worker. I knew that TV and film were a little more body diverse, progressive. I wasn't seeing that on Broadway or in theater at all.
Garza and other actors often use the word fat to describe their bodies. Abby Morris is a musical theater performer, just starting her career in New York. She says plus-size performers use the word fat in part to try to remove its pejorative connotations, and she uses it freely on her podcast More Than Tracy Turnblad, a reference to the lead character in Hairspray. She also wrote a one-woman show centering on issues of body type, including a medley of songs performed by characters written as fat.
Hungry for love, she's a sensitive soul. Plain Jane, badass. Keeping society so ill at ease.
Morris says her career so far has been limited by her size.
I'm 25, and until I graduated school, I'd never played a character under 40. And the first thing I got called in for after graduation off Showcase was Madame Morrible understudy.
That's the old magic professor in Wicked.
And they were looking for a young person, but it's still coded as older. So I thought that would go away, but it hasn't.
Theater casting is beginning to diversify. Casting notices now often specifically request actors of all backgrounds. David Krasner is the dean of the theater department at 5 Points College on Long Island. He says he is beginning to see changes in diversity of body types in the theater world, but there's still a long way to go.
Bias still exists. Stereotypes still exist.
And all one has to do is stand on the supermarket shopping line and open magazines. And you can see that there's some degree has changed, and some degree it hasn't.
A casting call recently went out for the national tour of Les Miserables, saying, "We are actively seeking performers of all races, ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, abilities, gender identities, and body types to audition." But Abby Morris says this isn't common.
For every casting call that says we want people of all diverse bodies to submit, there are 50 that say basically we want diversity, but they specify every type of diversity except body. I think that while it is getting better and there's a lot more visibility, we are super, super far from where we need to be.
This year's Bodycon closed with a performance advocating for body diversity.
I love my body, I love my skin, I am a goddess.
Abby Morris says she'll keep auditioning for Broadway shows, even though most of her work lately has been doing voiceovers. Emily Schutz, Columbia Radio News. Our lives are filled with chores, doing the dishes, folding the clothes, walking the dogs, but sometimes an obligation can become the thing that you really need. My co-host, David Marquez, has this audio essay.
The winter of 2020 was a bleak time for me. I'd always been a little on the melancholy side, but the combination of short days and pandemic isolation really took a toll. I would wake up at 2 in the afternoon and lie in bed until it was dark outside. I wasn't employed. I'd been rejected from a couple of internships, so I had a lot of time to spare. And strangely enough, that's what ended up saving me. My sister's a teacher, and she was pregnant with her second child at the time. Unlike me, she got up early. She was actually busy. So she called me up one day and asked, "Hey, can you come by tomorrow afternoon and take care of the dogs?" The dogs. She had 2 of them. Cronus, a little brown terrier mutt with a snaggletooth, and Luke, an Australian shepherd puppy who quickly grew to the size of my 3-year-old niece. Cronus was older and more independent. Luke was rambunctious and attached to people at the hip. So I went over one mild Friday. As much as I loved the dogs, it was still a chore getting dressed and getting out of bed. I walked through the gate into the backyard. My brother-in-law opened the back door and out stormed Luke, energetic as ever. I wasn't exactly sure what to do to tire him out like my sister asked. I tried chasing him around, but he was much faster than me. So I settled on fetch. Sometimes he would catch his foam ball in midair. Other times it would land right on his head. But he enjoyed it, so much so that he ignored his heavy panting. Cronus was watching all this from behind the glass door, frustrated that he had to wait. But I couldn't leave him disappointed. We took a nice long walk around the surrounding blocks. No tree went unsniffed, and no telephone pole went unsoiled. My tri-weekly visit soon became a ritual. By the end of the next week, it wasn't quite so hard to get out of bed and throw on a pair of jeans. There wasn't time to be depressed playing with Luke. He could hardly contain himself between every throw. I had to make sure he didn't nip my hand when I went to go pick up the ball. Even after my sister's school year ended early, I kept seeing the dogs 3 days a week. Every time Luke heard the back gate open, he would howl and wag his tail, convinced it was me. And whenever Cronus came over, he'd nudge me, nod towards my sneakers, and run to the door. Cronus and Luke got me through the dark winter and into a brighter spring. They got me through to my move to Manhattan and the start of my year at Columbia. But just as I was starting that new phase of my life, Cronus got sick. He had an intense surgery in May to remove a tumor. He seemed to be getting a little better for a few months, but then he stopped wanting to go for a walk. He died in October. I still haven't gotten over the loss. Cronus was irreplaceable. Sometimes I pull up videos on my phone of my niece as a baby feeding him dog food, and I smile. And of course, Luke is still a big part of my life. When he gets tired from fetch, he falls asleep with his head in my lap. Sometimes I get a little homesick, and that's when I ask my sister for a favor. Can I come over and throw a ball to the big old dog? Even though I'm a little busy, I think I can make the time. David Marquez, Columbia Radio News.
Thanks for that, David.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Elliot Chaparelli. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Clara Grunnett.
Director Julian Abraham coordinated our studio production with Rebecca Robinson and Lucy Grindon.
Our web editor, Linnea Arden, got this stream live to the web. David Newtown and Kelly Canaday produced the news. Senior editor Clara Sophia Daly led our copy team.
Our instructors Sally Herships, Robert Smith, and Ben Shapiro advised our staff. I'm David Marquez.
And I'm Emily Schutz. Uptown Radio is live on Thursdays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.